Well, good Monday morning, everyone. I am David, and I am your chaplain here at Progressive, and this is this week's Monday's Motivation. This week, in our daily Bible reading, we've made it to the book of Job. Now, the book of Job is in the section of the Old Testament called the wisdom literature. And you would think it's probably kind of odd that the story of Job is in the wisdom literature, but it makes a lot of sense. You see, when we look at the Old Testament and we look at wisdom, what God is trying to tell us through this wisdom literature is how to live wisely, how to benefit by living in this world. Because not everything that we do is going to help us to prosper and to be beneficial to us. Some things that we do may be poor choices, may be unwise, and they bring about certain consequences. Like the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is wisdom literature of the general kind, meaning that generally, if you do these wise things, these things will happen as a result. If generally you act foolish, then this will result. But what happens when you suffer and when you grieve for no fault of your own? When you haven't done anything, it's just part of being in the human experience. Well, that's what the book of Job answers. Now, what it doesn't answer for us is two things. Number one, this book really has nothing to do about Job's patience. Yes, Job had some patience, but that's got nothing to do with the book of Job. So let's throw that one out the window. The other thing is that this book, even though Job suffers greatly and has a lot of horrible things that he goes through, this book never answers the why question to our suffering. God never answers that for Job. And the main reason is because even if Job wanted to understand why God was doing all these things or allowing all these things to happen, Job just didn't have the intellectual, the mental capacity to understand why God does what he does. But what we do have, instead of an explanation of the why, we have a biblical perspective of our suffering when we just are part of the human experience. And that's what the book of Job tells us. So let's entitle this morning's talk with, what do we do when good people suffer? What do we do when good people suffer? And what do I mean by good people? Well, none of us are without sin, of course. And but that is that's kind of the vertical relationship that we're talking about there, is that there's this vertical relationship that all of us have sin. But there's also a horizontal plane of relationships, how we interact with other people. Listen to how the writer of Job begins the story about Job. He says in Job 1:1, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil." So Job, the writer here, is going to great lengths to tell us that Job was a good man, is that he was a moral man. He was a kind, compassionate, loving man. He loved others like all of us want to be loved. I mean, in fact, Job would be the kind of guy that we look up to and we want to be like in our actions and how we are to treat other people. Well, that's Job. And so it starts there because the whole point here is that sometimes we suffer and sometimes we grieve in life and we deal with problems, but yet we think we don't deserve them because we've done enough good things. But see, our suffering is not based on our merit as a person. It is actually controlled by the manifold wisdom of God. And here we're seeing that Job is going to have everything taken from him. His family's going to be taken from him. His wealth is going to be taken from him. His business is going to be taken from him. Even his own wife is going to turn against him. And Job loses everything. And the reason that Job is going to do this, or what's happening in this, is that God is wanting Job to trust him and trust his wisdom of allowing certain things into his life. You see, Job, we would be a lot like Job. We would say to God, well, God, haven't we loved you enough? Haven't we served others enough? Haven't we gone to church enough? Haven't we given enough money to this family or to this charity over here? Haven't we done enough, God? But God, that's not what he's looking at when he allows these things into our life, just like Job would have done. If our suffering was based on our merit, that would be called karma. But the Bible doesn't show that. In fact, karma is only a philosophical answer to why bad things happen to good people. And that's the best that karma can do is, well, you must have done something bad. That's why bad things are happening. But the Bible shows something completely different. It shows a better response. It shows us that even though we don't understand these things, we can trust God's goodness and His wisdom in these things. And so God is allowing these things to happen in Job, and He is wanting Job to come to a deeper understanding of how God controls everything in the universe, including and not exclusively to your own suffering here. And so when you are in your moments of suffering, when you're grieving, some of you may be there right now, let's do like Job. And all that he did, Job did not sin against God. He turned his eyes toward God and he praised God, because even though he's suffering, he knows that God is with him. He has not forgotten him, and He will ultimately bring him out of this moment in this season of suffering. Well, as you guys go through your moments of these times, or maybe you know someone that's going through one right now, be a friend. Be Job's friends. Go and just sit with them, grieve with them. Don't say anything unless you're asked, but just be a friend to them. And just the graceful presence of friends is what we need in those moments of our suffering. Well, I hope you guys will think about these things this week, and that you'll have an awesome, a safe, and a productive work week.